Hey, you guys, happy Friday. We made it through another week. I don't know about you, but these weeks are going long as the world starts to wake back up, open back up, and expectations get back to normal. And I can't even say they're back to normal because there were so many things put on hold due to COVID that now everything is urgent, like because it really was supposed to be done months ago. And so now the expectation is that your calendar is open. And for me, work didn't stop. And so, other things kind of got pushed in as, other people were on hold. And so just trying to balance it all. And so if you out there and you can hear me just and you feel me, just say, hey. I always want to know, who's watching, who's listening. Um, and just know that this too shall pass. This is a very strange time that we're living in, a time unlike any other time in history. Well, we say that, but then, I was thinking about the Spanish flu. I think it was like 1912 or something like that. And so Spanish flu took tons of lives. It was the original strand of H1N1. And during that time, of course, we can only imagine, and some are even old enough and still alive to have to actually bear witness to how minorities were treated in this country, in particular African Americans in 1912. So we talking right post slavery. So I can't imagine that there was a lot of care for us. I haven't done the research to see how that particular pandemic affected us, but definitely during that time, you had the women's suffrage movement, you had segregation, you had a post-slavery country, and you had sickness. So in the same way that you have now, what you didn't have is you didn't have the internet, you didn't have social media, you didn't have body cams, you didn't have cell phones, and so we did not have the ability to document in the way in which we document now. But although we want to say this is, it is unprecedented in most of our lifetime. Is the way that I'll end that thought process. But as I thought through this, like there have been times in history that just things that we never could have imagined would happen have happened, and that from the Great Depression, I mean, again, happened during a time where separate but equal was law. And so, I again can't imagine. But what I do know about our country, and in particular African Americans in our country, is that we are strong, that we're resilient, and that we endure. And I mean, just thinking about the Middle Passage and how we were brought over from Africa. And I don't know if you yourself have ever been on an actual slave ship, but years ago I had the opportunity to get on the Amistad. It was I worked for AT&T and they were sponsoring a national tour of it, and I was in awe of how tiny the belly of this ship was, because when you hear about it or when you see it on a movie screen, you have this thought of, you watch Roots and all of the other historic biopics about that time and space, and you're like, oh, they were stacked a certain kind of way. You see the manifest and the pictures and the schematics, but then you still just imagine it to be a much bigger space than what it is when you're on it. And so we survived that. Someone posted earlier this week about Henrietta Lacks. If you don't know who Henrietta Lacks is, she's a Black woman who went into Johns Hopkins very sick years ago during segregation. And she had cancer and I forgot what other ailments. And they pulled some DNA and some genetic code from her body that her gene is the gene that has been the catalyst for so many vaccines and so many cures, and it's still being used today throughout the medical community. Yet her family, her children, her grandchildren, her great grandchildren, et cetera, have never seen a dime from that, from her legacy. And so that is when some ask why the African American community is numb to certain things. I think there is not an expectation of fairness. Unfortunately, there's not an expectation of justice. There's not an expectation of compensation for a good day's work, because the history of our country really has proven that that is not something that necessarily happens. And so there's not an expectation of equal pay. I don't even in. I mean, would it be nice? Yes, but was there ever a time in my corporate life that I thought that I was making the same money as the white man doing the exact same job sitting next to me? Unfortunately, no. And you know, that it's just the world that we live in. But Fridays, I try to, talk about, in my mind, I don't always tell you guys, but especially on the days where I don't have a guest, I try to think about strategically what is the topic. And this is something, if you work with me and I'm helping you refresh, rebrand, launch your social media, I always recommend that you have a plan, like a content strategy and a marketing plan of how you're going to push things out. And so I try to think of Fridays, and I always have is like faith-filled Fridays. Like, what can I talk about to increase people's faith, regardless of what your denomination is? And the biblical definition of faith is now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So I think that even if you're not a Christian, that there's a part of you that definitely understands the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. 1,000 Nigerian females disappeared from our Dutch refugee camp. This is UN. Okay, Monica, thank you for sharing that. And that's the other thing too. In the US, we see news through a very narrow lens compared to how the world news. My best friend lives in Malaysia, and when we talk about the news that she sees in that part of the world versus the news that we are privy to, it's very different. Our news is very watered down, and it is very selective in what it decides that it wants us to see in any given moment. So, I was watching. If you know me, my husband's a minister, and I'm a woman of faith, and one of my favorite faith-based leaders is Bishop T.D. Jakes. And so he preached a message last Friday that I streamed recently that just really fired me up in a good way. And it really inspired me. And it really caused me to study. So there was one particular, quote that he said, experience worketh patience. And so then he used that, just as during a sentence. And that caused me to go study the part of the Bible where it talks about that. Because I think, like I always say, it doesn't matter if you're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, etc. I don't think that anyone would deny that the Bible is one of the greatest books that's ever been written. So regardless of belief, I recommend you pick it up. There's a bunch of translations. See what it does for you, I mean, and I don't just say that. Like, I read some of Shadran books. She's a Buddhist teacher. I've read the Quran. Like, I think that, as a leader, you should also be a learner, and that it's important to understand, because before Christ, before Jesus, there was no Christianity. Before Muhammad, there was no Muslim. Before Buddha, there was no Buddhism. And so these were all brilliant prophetic men, and that birthed movements and religions and belief systems. I personally am a Christian. However, I know that there's some parts of the world and some corridors of the world that have never heard the Bible preached. And so, anyway, I don't want to make this a super Christian conversation or a super biblical conversation, because that was not the intent. But I want to go to what I studied. So I studied Romans 5 because that whole experience, work, of patience piece really jumped out to me. And so in Romans 5, starting at verse 3, it says that we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials. Now, this works for anybody. Don't feel like I'm preaching at you, but hopefully this will inspire you. That when we run into problems and trials, we know that that helps us develop endurance. And so you can take that to Jay-Z's quote that he says, it's not in my successes that I met my true self, but in my failures. And that the whole movement about failing forward and the whole movement about, you meet your strength in your weakest moments and in your hard times. So the Bible is basically saying the same thing when it talks about that trials and problems help grow our endurance. So right now we're experiencing a lot of trials and problems in our world, between COVID, between what's happening with police brutality, with racial injustice, with inequality. And that chain chapter goes on to say that endurance develops strength and character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And so, you can take that to say, and endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confidence. And this hope will not lead to disappointment. And so that stood up for me because we're being asked questions, and we are being put to some tests and going through some trials and problems that we don't necessarily know the answers to. We don't know why this is happening. We don't know how to stop it. There's not a vaccination. We have someone leading our country who's been in a bunker for days. Like, I guess he thought those thugs that was looting was going to come for him, to quote his words of how he described them. And then when he comes out the bunker, he announces that he's going to have his first post-COVID rally on Juneteenth in Tulsa, which I think is just, I mentioned that yesterday, so I won't go down that. But my point is that even if you remove COVID, if you remove what just happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, life is filled with problems and trials. And those that survive, there's that quote, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Those of us that survive and endure, and not just survive, but thrive, realize that problems and trials come to help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength and character. If I had not experienced some of the problems and trials that I've experienced in my life, then I wouldn't be the woman that I am today. I wouldn't be the leader that I am today. I wouldn't be the wife that I am today. I wouldn't be the mother that I am today, the daughters, the friend, etc. Now, this is not oh, yay, problems come. None of us want that. However, I don't know how any of us live and die and not experience them. It's going to happen. And so it really becomes a mindset thing of, when problems and trials come my way, how will I deal with them? And do I have the mental capacity to handle them? Am I strong enough physically? Am I strong enough mentally? Am I strong enough spiritually that this will not break me? That even if I do fall down, I'm going to get back up. Like Les Brown says, if you fall down, fall on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up. And so that's the thing of every single time. And I have had numerous problems and trials that I felt like came out of nowhere, that I felt like pulled the rug from under me. Some of them my fault, many of them beyond my control, but all of them taught me a lesson. And that is the biggest thing in this, as we think about this stage that we're in as a country, as a nation, in the world, as a people. What are we gonna learn? What are we gonna do different? In Bishop Jake's message, he talked about, what's happening right now. We learn patience and endurance by the things we experience. Absolutely. The power comes in what we actually learn and how we move forward with that knowledge. You're right. You're right. Like, what do we do? Like, so now we understand. And now, instead of getting frustrated by people of other ethnicities understanding and shifting the focus and questioning whether it's authentic or fake, or whether it deserves to have the conversation or not, or being exhausted with trying to explain. And I get it because I felt all those ranges of emotion. But it's due to COVID and there's no sporting activities and there's no summer festivals and there's no fairs. Because of all of that, they have nothing else that they can do during this time but be compelled and moved to care about the plight of the Black community. And if this pandemic and virus, not if, because it did shine a light on the health disparities in our country and the need for there to be improvement in every way, shape, and form. Like this isn't new. I was thinking about, I'm going to share a very personal testimony story right now. Because I was watching Oprah, Where Do We Go From Here? And she did a great job and had phenomenal panelists on, all Black, articulating the Black experience in this moment. And so I highly recommend watching that 2-part series that happens this week. But, it is not uncommon to show up at the hospital, even with insurance, as an African American and be mistreated. I've had several times in my life that has happened to me and cost me my life, and or could have cost me my life. It didn't cost me my life, but it came close. And the first time it happened, some people have been asking, like, when's the first time you experienced racism? I was like thinking about that. And, I grew up in the South Side of Chicago. I didn't really experience much racism growing up because I grew up in, predominantly Black neighborhood. And so I really didn't have to interact with anyone that didn't look like me. But then I moved here, and my freshman year of college, I was dating a guy and I got pregnant, and I made it to 5 months, and I started having some serious pain and called an ambulance, and the ambulance came and took me to the hospital. And I was screaming. I was 18 years old. My mom wasn't. I was out of town. Had his boyfriend. He wasn't the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm a freshman in college, and I'm experiencing this for the first time. I really hadn't even really told anyone what was happening because, of course, I'm like, this was not the plan. I did not move here for this to happen. And so, but 5 months, I was a good way in. This is progressing. And so I got to the hospital here in the inner city of Milwaukee, and at that point I was screaming. I was in so much pain. I mean, I was like crying and I was screaming and I was just like, make it stop. And I was petrified because, now I know having an 18-year-old and 20, like, you're still a child in so many ways. And, when I got to the hospital, the doctor walked up to me and said, I will not see you until you shut up. And I was like, what? And he stuck me in a room and was like, I won't see you till you shut up. And so then a nurse walked in and she's like, you have to calm down. But it wasn't in a way that I mean, I've had children since then. I wasn't being talked to in a way that I would demand to be talked to at this point in the juncture. I was 18. And so I laid there. The nurse checked the baby's heartbeat. The baby's heart was beating. But then, again, never been pregnant, young, not very experienced at this. Didn't really want to call my mama because, look, I already had messed up as far as I was concerned. And, laid there and tried to calm down because I really wanted the doctor to see me. And at this point, I'm 5 months pregnant. I cared about this child I was carrying. So it got to a point that I felt like that I needed to use the restroom. And I asked my boyfriend at the time if he would help me to the bathroom because they really weren't paying any attention to us. And I went to the bathroom, and unfortunately, during that trip to the bathroom, the child in which I was carrying, I delivered. And so then I start screaming again because now the child, I delivered the child, and the child's in the toilet. And I know this is graphic, but I mean, like, this is the Black experience, and for so many. So I start screaming again, like, oh my God, I don't want to see this. Ah! You know, he's 18 too. He runs out trying to get help. And the nurse walks in and she's like, well, then don't look. And, you know, the thought, you know, I come from this great family. I'm a freshman at Milwaukee School of Engineering. I have a bright future ahead of me. But all they saw in this moment was an 18-year-old Black girl come in through the ER pregnant with her boyfriend. And at the time, I didn't grasp the gravity of how I was mistreated. But you know, as you grow older and you think about, I've never been back to that hospital ever. I don't even know how their doors are still open. I guess it's needed in the community. And they known as the baby hospital. And so, or they were known as the baby hospital. And that really, so then next thing I know, they come in and they're rushing me off to surgery. They're like, you gotta have surgery, you gotta have a DNC, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, you gotta do this, you gotta make sure you don't bleed out. I'm not understanding any of this. You know, at this point, my mom's trying to get to me from Chicago. You know, I'm calling my dad, who lived all the way in Virginia at the time. You know, at this point now, we're trying to rally the troops, but you know, it took a while. And by the time I was up for surgery, my mom was there. You know, my mom asked me, is there anything that I, you know, did I have any questions? And I just said, I just really want to understand what happened, you know, and the white doctor's like, it just happened. And it was just, there was just such a lack of empathy and such a lack of respect for what I had just gone through. And then there was trauma after that. Seeing that was really traumatic for me. Experiencing that was really traumatic for me. And, that was my first experience, I would say, with truly understanding the health disparities that happen to young Black women. And so then, of course, a few years later, I get married. I have Michael. I get an amazing doctor who happened to be white. But I delivered at Waukesha Memorial with both my boys. I'm like, I'm never going to a city of Milwaukee hospital again. That's how I felt after that. Like, no. Which is terrible to feel, because now here I am. Now I have some Black privilege at this point. And now I don't want to support the hospitals that could use my very good insurance money because of how I had been previously treated. And that's what happens in our neighborhoods, unfortunately, and why the service levels start to go down, because then those of us who do get into a place of privilege and a little bit of power decide we're going to take our spending elsewhere because our dollar is not respected in or out of our community. But at least there are certain spaces that you feel like you can get to that class matters. And who your doctor is matters. And so because this particular doctor had his rights at this hospital and he was a highly respected doctor at that hospital, I was treated well because I was one of his patients. And so the thought was, if I'm one of his patients, then I must be okay. So it was really, basically, he was like my white ally in that moment. And so, you know, that's just one. And then, you know, I had another situation a few years ago where I ended up in the hospital. I drove myself to the ER due to some terrible stomach pains. And I sat in that hospital in Mequon for 13 days. And they could not figure out what was wrong with me. And finally, the shift changed. And then they figured that, you know, and then someone else figured it out. But by the time they figured out, like, one more day, I would have been dead. My organs were shutting down. I had a hernia. I had a umbilical hernia. I had a hole in my stomach. I had some other things happening. My intestines were like it was like, I don't remember, you know, it was not a good experience. And so these are the things that even when you see me, someone like me, that you may think like, well, what kind of problems? Like, it happens to all of us. It's not just happening in marginalized, disenfranchised neighborhoods. It's not just happening to the uninsured or underinsured. It is happening to anyone who carries skin with color. And there is a propensity for it to happen to you. And when you advocate for yourself, you kind of get boxed in and treated differently. And so, if this moment in time causes my children not to have to experience that. And it's not to say, I mean, I went yesterday on Downer and picked up my new glasses and was treated very well in an establishment that I know a lot of Blacks don't necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying none because I've got friends that shop there. That's how I ended up there. But we're not the main customer base for this particular eyeglass store by no means, or even in this neighborhood. And so I just wanted to share that because those things all I had to be patient through them, which again strengthened my endurance, which again strengthened my character, which again prepared me to be a better leader and to be stronger and to be more prepared and more aware. But also, I feel like the problems and the challenges and the trials that I have experienced in my life also provided a sense of humility. So when someone else is going through something, my first instinct is not to judge or to throw my nose up or down at them because you don't know their story. You don't know how you got there, how they got there. Don't make assumptions. We have so many implicit biases, so many unconscious biases, so many limiting beliefs that are stopping us from being our best selves, that are stopping us from really doing the work of helping people, that are stopping us from actually making authentic connections with people. When I tell that story about being 18, there was an assumption made about me. And it wasn't that I was a college student who had just moved here, who happened to get pregnant, which happens all the time. Pregnancy does not care what race you are. And so who actually had a mother that I was still insured under, and I had great insurance. And so, but there was just this assumption. Here's another one brought in by ambulance, right? So on and so forth. And we see this all the time kind of thing. Same when I came in. And then the last story I'll tell about for those of you who've been following me for a while know that there was a tumor found in my chest a few years ago, pressed against my lung and removed. And I had been, and this really stood up for me as I've read about so many of the COVID deaths, because I went to the hospital for 2 years straight for chest pain. And I was told every single time that I was having a panic attack or I was stressed. They did the little EKG. But I was always told, the usual, you got high blood pressure, this and that, all the things, all the pre-existing conditions that they label African Americans with, versus giving us some of the real tests that are required to get to the bottom of what's really happening with us so we can walk in our true healing. And so I had a car accident. And as a result of the car accident, the airbags deployed and I had a ringing in my ear. And so I told the ER doctor that I had a ringing in my ear. And because of that, he did a scan higher than anyone had ever done before. And because of that scan, he found that tumor in my chest that anyone who typically gets that tumor, because it doesn't show signs a lot of times, it grows. It usually becomes malignant, and it sometimes can just smother out your lung in a way that you die or you end up, with cancer. And so that car accident inadvertently saved my life because in that moment, because of the car accident, I was checked for something more serious than me just walking in saying I had chest pains, because as a Black person, it wasn't believable that I could just be having chest pains for something serious. And so share that to say that we have to advocate for ourselves. We have to be strong. We have to not just survive, but thrive. And we have to learn the lessons in our experiences so we can endure. We have a long history of endurance. The people who came before us endured so much more than we could ever imagine. And I will say, I am a believer in what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that every experience is another opportunity for me to gain understanding and for me to share. And yes, come through Jesus with the car accident. I agree, John. Go watch TD Jake's message from this past Sunday, because that's really, he talks about how God will allow things. He talked about the burning bush, and he talked about how Moses noticed the bush was burning, but it was not consumed. So the car accident, I was hurt, but I was not consumed. I was hurt, you know, and that hurt actually uncovered an injury. Because when you hurt, Robert Powell, I got this analogy from him. Like, it's a difference between, are you hurt and are you injured? And so, when you're hurt, like, say if you're an athlete, when you're hurt, the coach like, you hurt? Yeah, I'm hurt. And it's like, okay, but I can still play because I'm hurt. I'm just hurt, just hurt. And so then you go back into the game, you help win the game. But when you're injured, yeah, nah, bro, like, it's like, I'm injured. Like, I need help to fix this. I often ask people, since I heard him say that, I have moved that analogy into the relationship spectrum of, is the relationship, are you just hurt, or is the relationship injured? Because if it's injured, we need to bring in some specialists and therapists and counselors, etc. And so, in times where I'm upset with my husband, am I just hurt right now, or is our marriage actually injured? And so I would ask you, like, even, you could take it into your job. Is this job just, am my feelings hurt, or am I injured right now? Like, is there injury being caused by me being in this space? And so, and yes, you can be pressed from every side and not crushed, and that's another biblical scripture. And so, at the top of this, I talked about Romans 5, and I just talked about how problems and trials are here to help us develop endurance, and like point blank in the period. And so what the problems and challenges that we're having right now as a people, as a nation, you may be having as a family, you may be having because you're furloughed, you may be having because you're sick. Like, how is that growing your endurance? Like, how are you letting it shape you? Because it's really about mindset. Endurance is defined as the fact or power of enduring an unpleasant or difficult process or situation without giving way. So then the sentence they say she was close to the limit of her endurance. So there's so many times, there's another scripture that says that, God won't allow you to be pushed past your limit. And so when I feel like I'm there, I'm like, okay, you said you won't allow me to be pushed past my limit. I feel like I'm at my limit right now. So I'm going to need to remind you what you said, because if I get pushed past it, like, well, that can't even happen because you said you would not let that happen. And so that, yes, that is our confidence in Christ, that we always win. But then what do we say to the people that say, so all of us watching, most of you watching, people of faith, especially those that you're coming in and you giving scripture. But, and I watched George Floyd's funeral, and, and even just to the Black community as a whole, we don't feel like we always win, because we feel like time after time, we're watching Black lives get taken. And we're living in a nation that doesn't seem to care about our pain. They don't seem to care about our struggle, and they don't seem to take it seriously because it doesn't impact them the way it impacts us. Even with COVID, we saw that. And so it doesn't feel like we're winning. It feels like the police are winning. It feels like Trump is winning. It feels like the government is winning. It feels like people in power and of affluence are winning. And so, again, it goes back to mindset. Because, I do believe I'm always winning. I got a shirt that says all I do is win, And so, yes, and it's about the process, and that it may not feel like an immediate win. I think about Dr. King, and I believe there was a part of him that was prophetic, and meaning like he could see things, that God spoke to him and he could see. So when he gave the "I have a dream" speech, he really did. I believe he really did have that dream, and then he was able to articulate it. I mean, there's even stories that says Mahalia Jackson was behind him, like, tell him about the dream. And so when he says, "I may not make it to see the promised land," I believe that he knew in his spirit that, I'm not going to see all of this come to fruition. I'm not going to see President Obama. But I'm okay with me being a part of this part of the process. I know that the part of the process that I am working on, the part of the process that I am influencing, is necessary to get to the next level, because there's levels to everything. Winning is not always what we want to be, but it does work out for good. Sometimes we don't see the tangible win, and maybe generate. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Because I think that if my grandparents and great grandparents, and even my mom says to me, from their perspective, some of the things that we're able to do, some of the things we've been able to achieve, some of the rights that we have, even seeing President Obama get elected, these are things that they could not wrap their mind around. The fact that we can use whatever water fountain we want, the fact that we can go into a bathroom, the fact that that we can stop at a rest stop and think about, for those of you who grew up like me as a little Black kid traveling down south, and you wonder why y'all always had to pull on the side of the road under the underpass to use the bathroom, or like it was this big deal when you had to use the bathroom. And it was because they knew that there was just certain places that no, we can't stop there. Like you can't use baby, we can't take you in there. And so then even in my lifetime, there's if my kids have to use the bathroom and we're on a road trip, I will stop in backwater wherever and walk into a gas station and let them use the bathroom and not be concerned, not have immediate concern that we're going to be harmed, because we live in a nation of these unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And although we don't experience all those promises in the Declaration of Independence every day as African Americans, they are there. And I think that all of us are working towards them becoming more of a reality in our life. So anyway, just wanted to pop in to say, endure. The art of incremental wins. Yes. And just because you lost a specific battle does not mean we've lost the war. And you're right. What define what a loss is? Because there's some things that happen in my life that to somebody else it may look like I'm losing, but to me I'm like, this ain't nothing. This is nothing. So many things. Just like I say, success is subjective and relative. Same thing with losing. To me, I just adopted this mentality that I only lose if I quit. And so as long as I'm able to endure and keep going, I'm still winning. Every day that I wake up in my right mind, that's a win. Every day that I wake up and I'm able to share and impact lives and inspire people, that's a win. Every day that I wake up and all my husband and all four of my children are healthy and in their right minds, that's a win. That is a win. And so we have to focus on some of our small victories as we are working towards the greater good. And that is the way to stay encouraged versus discouraged. And that is the way to endure. Look, between Dr. Katina and Mr. Haynes, two of my favorite transformation leadership coaches. Yes, that part, I'm playing part in influencing the win by sowing seeds of development transfer. Yes, you are. You both are. And so that's critical. And so, yeah, you have to decide for yourself what's a win and what would really be a loss to me. What would really be a loss to me is if I lived and died and I didn't impact lives. What would really be a loss to me is if I lived in a city like Milwaukee and God moved me here and I didn't make this city better in some way, shape, or form. And if I didn't make the African-American community here better, and if I didn't improve commerce for the African-American community here, and if I didn't do some type of bridge building, that to me, then I'm losing. That's when I feel like when I am not living at my full potential and when I am not living out my purpose on purpose, that's when I feel like I'm losing. That's when I'm like, Sean, you're losing right now. because there is a plan and there is a legacy and there is a purpose. Mark Twain said the two best days of a person's life are the day they're born and the day they figure out why. So I figured out my why. So now, once you figure that out, you know, people be trying to figure out, I want to know. Do you really? Because with great power comes great responsibility. To whom much is given, much is required. So once you know, you got to work at that thing every day. Because if you're not working at it every day, then you're not thriving. You're just surviving. And there's always going to feel like there's an emptiness on the inside of you because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And everyone takes it back to the Bible. My husband posted this the other day, Minister West. He said, to know what you're supposed to do and not do it is sin. So then that's a whole nother conversation. I'm going to let him preach that. You know, I'm not the preacher in the family. So I will end this by saying, whatever is happening in your life, endure. 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 Remember that definition of endure. If you got to write endure real big, you got to put on a post-it on your bathroom mirror, you know, regardless of what happens today, regardless of what comes my way, regardless of how I'm treated, I'm going to endure. You know, something that was said during that Oprah conversation that I had to rethink. You know, they talked about the conversation that all of us have as Black parents with our kids, and I've had it with my boys, which is the get home alive conversation. I mentioned this yesterday. Hands on the wheel, look them in the eye, respectful. Can I get my wallet? This, and that. And, you know, one of her guests mentioned how emasculating that conversation is. And I never thought about it as an emasculating thing. I just thought about it as a mama bear thing of like, we'll fix it on the back end, just get home. And so now I'm trying to figure out how I can reframe that, because I don't ever want to, I don't want my sons to feel emasculated by anything that I say to them. They're men, they're strong men, they're the future. However, I also want to be honest with them about the world we live in, and I want them to get home safe. So what does that conversation look like? And I may get some Black men on where we talk about, because, you know, we say it through the mouths of a mom, and where we talk about, you know, how they feel when that conversation happens to them and how could it be worded different to make it more impactful. Because definitely it's a message that unfortunately still has to be said. It's been being said since we were able to leave the plantation without a path and go wherever we wanted to go. And yes, how do you prepare for that? All right, you guys, have a great weekend. I can't wait to see you next week. Next week, I have Cecilia Gore with me. I have Karanda Cook with me from Texas. Cecilia, of course, is local as my guest. I can't remember if I have another guest, but I'll be posting this weekend, so I'll let you know. All right, you guys, peace, love, power. I hope that you enjoyed this week. Karita was amazing. Jen was amazing. Jaquila was amazing yesterday. Watch some of these replays. Go to our YouTube channel. Follow our YouTube channel. And thank you for your support. All right, you guys, peace, love, power. I'm out.